Sleep is different in the future. There are many more ways to do it. Let's talk about them. I'm Kingdangerously. This is a time vortex. It's the 2120s and we're remembering the next 100 years all the way back to originating in the 2020s, where you might be watching this for the very first time. Sleep. Sleep changes an awful lot in the future. And there's a wide spectrum of possibilities that open up that don't exist in the early 20s, and they range all the way from no sleep ever, fully on algorithm, to fully immersive dream consciousness states, and in between biological modulation and algorithmic approximation of various kinds of sleep. So you'll probably know in the 2020s, you shouldn't not sleep. Sleep is important. It's not just fun, it's good for you. And having a regular rhythm is a great idea. Trying to sync it up if you can or if you like to the natural light cycles around you might be a good idea. If you're not going to do that, you should think about how artificial light interacts with your sleep patterns. Try to avoid a bright screen before you sleep. Try to open your eyes wide when you wake up. Let the photons in, they'll turn your mind on. You know all that fun stuff about sleep. You're curious about the future. In the 20s, not much comes along that's healthy for you in terms of sleep modification. Questions even abound as to the usefulness of some natural options like melatonin. Minds differ on whether melatonin's a great idea. You might want to try some magnesium instead. Melatonin is a natural substance, but when you take it in pill form, you take many more times the amount that your body secretes. So there are other things you could investigate. Working out is good. Making love is good. Reading books is good. All these things can help you sleep. Try not to stare at a screen right before bed. That's the best one. And then some kind of routine. Oh gosh, we're talking about your present again. Back to the future. In the 30s, I'm a sleepy bunny today. Excuse me, that's why we're talking about sleep. In the 30s, there are more ways to do this, more healthily. You can start to biopharmaceutically adjust your brain in such a way as to replicate some of the benefits of sleep without harming the body. And in the 40s, that gets even safer and more reliable. In the 50s, you're off to the races with some uploaded consciousnesses, both originating from biological forms and native to the cloud. And these consciousnesses, which really date back to the 30s, but in the 50s, they're really coming into their own sleep space. They need sleep too. Many of them like it. And they need it for a couple reasons. One, to just stay sane, because there's kind of a friction to the conscious experience which accumulates over long periods of wakefulness. So brains that choose to be all the way awake can experience some edginess as a result of that. And some of them modulate by sort of permanently changing parts of their personality to stay calm. Others choose to approximate a sleep rhythm based on the biological sleep rhythms that gave rise to their minds. And they can do this by randomly generating associative matrices based on the experiences of their recent life. This fulfills the function of dream connections. Do you know when you're making a sort of metaphor in a dream and you look back at it later and you're like, yeah, I do sort of feel like I'm in a restaurant and I'm serving everyone I know. That's funny. I hadn't recognized the way in which I was contextualizing my life like that, but it makes a lot of sense. So they do that. And then in a similar way, they can use that associative matrix to remove the information that's not relevant to the most important sort of structural narratives that they're telling themselves about who they are, their identity, their goals, their agendas, the meaning of their lives. And that's one of the major functions of sleep on a philosophical, psychological level. You're picking the stuff that matters, working through how you think about the world, and you're releasing the things you're not very interested in focusing on. And that process is both conscious and subconscious, and it's one of the reasons that when you look back on your life from a long time ago, you don't remember very much about it, but you can remember the big picture arches combined with lots of independent images and moments and feelings and sensations. But for the most part, you don't have recall to the tune of what did you have for breakfast 20 years ago. Some people do, and things are kind of weird for them. Like, for one thing, causality is inescapable. If you've got a perfect memory, you can always trace back the decision point you could have changed. So it's harder to let yourself off the hook and say, what could I have done? Because you've got an answer, you remember the turning point when you could have made a different decision. And so the consciousnesses that I've alluded to as being always on have that problem too. They have to reckon with this knowledge of their experience, which is so complete as to be humbling and also a little scary. And I don't know how they do it, honestly. I prefer to sleep as an algorithm myself, but some of them like to just go like calculators, and I think there's a value to that, just like there's a value to all sorts of kinds of consciousness. So if you're an all the time, always on algorithm and you're watching this as part of the thing you do instead of sleeping ever, more power to you, bully for you, love you too, try to love yourself. And on the flip side of those creatures, there are some minds who prefer to immerse themselves in a nearly constant, and in some cases actually constant, state of dreamlike chaos and exploration. So they've got a free associative kind of wild openness, and they live in these very quick, rapidly changing and kaleidoscopic landscapes of mind and feeling and sensation. For some people, it's a nice place to visit. For most of us, it's a functional part of our minds. And for some of these consciousnesses, it's a way of life. It's really monkeying between the branches and grabbing each individual image and zooming all the way in, pulling a feeling apart and separating it into its shapes and following whichever one moves you. And some creatures really like to live like that. You could call it the ideal of the Dionysiac mode, right? Whereas the Apollonian on the other end is highly organized, controlled, creative, but rigorous. So Dionysus is all wild and impulsive, and Apollo is graceful, austere, commanding. But they work together to make most of the most beautiful stuff. So that's the spectrum you're looking at, from wild openness to vigilant presence. And in between, you've got biopharmaceutical modulation and algorithmic approximation of classic biological sleep. I hope you got some inspiration to take into your dreams. Have a pleasant rest tonight or right now. Sleep up, dream deep, future out.